all for joining us, and I'm going to just go ahead and start with the presentation. As I go through the presentation, feel free to interrupt. It's my favorite way of presenting is to have conversations with the audience, either in the chat box or some of you may have used the phone dial-up for the meeting, and feel free to interrupt either on phone or in the chat box. We'll have a couple of polls, one coming up pretty soon and another one later, so be ready to respond to those polls, too, if you can. And I know some of you are in a room with more than one person, so that's fine. You can respond to those polls any way you'd like to. Oh, Gloria from AbleNet tells me there is no phone dial-up for this session, so we'll just be using the chat box. Okay, so here we are, technology and cognitive supports, and this session is particularly focused on strategies for memory scheduling and time management. I do want to say before we get started, I rarely do a presentation that only shows technology and the ways you can use it. So what we're going to do in each of these sessions is start with a little bit of background information or factual information about the topic of cognitive support and cognitive support technology, and then we will work into showing examples. For this week, it'll be examples of strategies and tools for memory scheduling and time management. So let's get started. One other thing before we get started, though. I want to thank Lynn Gitlow, who is my colleague at Ithaca College in New York, for some of the content in this presentation. She and I did a workshop together at the ATIA conference in Orlando, so I've modified that, but she was certainly a contributor to this workshop, even though I don't believe she's with us today. I also wanted to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I am Gayl Bowser, and I was for many years the coordinator of the Oregon Technology Access Program, which was the state of Oregon's technology for students with disabilities program. I had the opportunity in that job to work with school districts all over Oregon and eventually all over the United States. But one of the things that I think is important to say is that I am a teacher by training, and I have worked as a teacher in self-contained classrooms for kids with significant disabilities, many of whom used the products that the AbleNet company offers, and I've worked with all ages of kids. Since I retired, this is what retirement looks like for me, so that's pretty silly, but since I retired, I've primarily worked with adults with disabilities, and that's been really fun. It's also helped me understand a little bit more about the use of cognitive support technology and the ways that it can help people grow up, our kids to grow up to be more independent adults. So for me, that's one of the reasons for using cognitive support technology. I'd like to know who you are a little bit. So in a webinar like this where we really don't get to chat, what I'd like you to do is click one of these boxes. I'd love to know if we have parents of people with disabilities, special education teachers, paraprofessionals. If you could click on one of those boxes, I'd appreciate it. We've got lots of people clicking in. We're up to 85 already. Oh, my gosh. We are we're almost to everybody, so I'm going to wait just a second more. And I can tell you that we have about a third of our folks are identify as AT specialists, lots of OTs, SLPs today, and a bunch of special education teachers. The only category that's not represented on this webinar at the moment is adult home or vocational providers, so group homes or vocational providers. I'm going to go ahead and show you the results of the poll. There you go. And I'm assuming that many of you who identified as AT specialists are probably also in one or the other categories here of professionals, the OTs, SLPs, special education teachers, paraprofessionals. I'm really happy to have those of you who identified as parents of kids with disabilities or people with disabilities, and I'm really happy. Well, I'm happy to have you all, but it's really good to have parents on the call. Really good to have paraprofessionals on the call, because I know you're the folks often in the trenches who identify the cognitive support needs. And thank you for those of you who have joined us as administrators. I think without your support in this work, we can do a whole lot of things that don't get carried through as well without you. So let's go ahead and let's talk about the learning goals for today. The first, so participants will learn about, we're going to do just a little bit of background information about the prevalence of cognitive disabilities in the United States. We have some statistical data that we'll just run through so that you can see what we mean when we talk about cognitive disabilities. We'll talk a little bit about the research on this topic. And then we'll identify both commonly available tools, things like your cell phone or websites that are easily and readily available to many people. And then we'll show some specialized tools also that might be useful for people with cognitive disabilities. One of the difficulties in presenting a topic like this is that we are talking about such a wide range of folks, and so that's always challenging for a presenter in a short webinar. Let's look at the range of people in the United States. Now, this is people all ages. So we have about 17% of the folks in the United States have intellectual disabilities, so about almost 5 million people. Another group that we often think about when we think about people with cognitive disabilities, especially memory disabilities, is the population of people who have Alzheimer's, and also the population of people who have brain injury. One of the things that Lynn taught me as we put this original presentation together is that there's a huge population of folks, almost 12 million, who have persistent mental illness, and that they also need cognitive support to get through their days and to be as independent as possible. I wanted to say one other thing about the brain injury group, because I think it's very poignant these days. A couple of the companies that I have worked with in doing work with cognitive support technology tell me that for adults, their primary population, the primary population that works with cognitive support technology, are soldiers coming back from our Mideast wars. There was a huge percentage of young men who came back with different kinds of traumatic brain injury that need cognitive support technology for memory, for task completion, for all the kinds of things that we'll be talking about in this webinar series. And that makes me very sad. I don't know about you. But anyway, so these are the groups we're talking about. I didn't mention the 3% of folks who have strokes, but I think they're a group that we often think about when we think about cognitive support technology, and particularly support for independent living. The next slide sort of emphasizes that traumatic brain injury issue, and I put it up primarily so that you could see this is the incidence of new cases of each of these conditions every year, and you see very clearly that in this group of conditions, traumatic brain injury, we get about 1.5 million people a year who have traumatic brain injury. Nick Whalen says, what's the overall prevalence in the general population? What does the whole chart represent? Nick, I can't really answer that question because the way many people define cognitive support technology or cognitive support needs in different ways. So these were the best to, particularly, let me go back to the previous slide. This is a 2012 publication from the University of Colorado. You see the citation at the bottom of the screen there. That's a good place to go for demographic information if you're looking for further information. I would refer you to that site for any more information. These are the primary groups of people who use cognitive supports, but then there are many others, so it's a little hard to pin it down. So, next slide. What are we talking about? What are cognitive disabilities? Again, I want to refer you to a website that might help you to get a feel for cognitive disabilities. And I'm going to try here, this is my first time doing this, to share my desktop. And while I'm doing that, I see that somebody asked, am I going to address kids with autism? Yes, we are going to talk about kids with autism in this webinar, but mostly in the context of kids with intellectual disabilities who need cognitive supports. I think anything that we talk about in this webinar series can apply to anybody who has memory problems. And actually, in doing the research about this topic, I learned a few tricks for myself. So let's go back to the topic of what are we talking about. I wanted to refer you to the WebAIM resources, and this particular article, which is the link on your screen when we go back to the screen. This is a really nice summary of cognitive disabilities, and one of the things they talk about that probably relates to the question about autism is that when we're talking about cognitive disabilities, what we're really talking about is a functional limitation rather than a diagnosis. So any one of us who has some sort of functional limitation, like remembering your schedule or showing up for appointments on time, things like that, could benefit from cognitive support technology. In this series, we're thinking about folks who have more severe difficulties with memory and task completion and organization and planning. So anybody that you know or that you provide support to may be a candidate for cognitive support technology, including perhaps your spouse or your son or whoever it is that you live with that might have trouble with memory or problem solving or paying attention. On this site, you'll see that there's a discussion of the difference between functional and clinically diagnosed cognitive disabilities, and then a list of the kinds of categories that we'll be talking about. So I want to refer you to that site because we don't have enough time today to go over the whole topic of cognitive disabilities. But let's go on and look at a definition of cognitive disabilities. And again, you'll see here in this definition that the focus is on functional and psychosocial impairments, meaning those people who have mental health issues or those people who have autism and may need help managing the social part of cognitive or of social interactions. The most prevalent cognitive consequences of cognitive disabilities: memory, organization, attention, concentration, initiation, starting things and finishing things, and processing through difficult tasks. So that's one definition of cognitive support, and it's a very clinical definition. Let's look at some of the models that address cognitive support. And these may be models that many of you are familiar with, but I just wanted to point out that all three of them are models that focus on function rather than diagnosis when we start looking at cognitive supports. So the ICF, International Classification of Functioning, the Matching Persons with Technology model from Marcia Shearer, and of course, for many of you who work in schools, the SET framework, all focus on the functional aspects of using technology for people with disabilities. If you're not familiar with, so I'm going to talk about each one of them a little bit. If you're not familiar with the ICF, I really recommend that you do just a little bit of research about it. It's the International Classification of Function was developed by a group from the World Health Organization. There is the adult ICF and also one for children and youth that's called the ICF-CY. But what they do is look at the clinical diagnosis, so you see the health condition, and then address body functions and structure, which is the typical medical model, but then also the limitations posed by the disability, so the ways that people are prevented from being active and from participating. There's no way I can explain the whole model to you in this webinar, but it's a really good one that you might want to look into, particularly if you are in the business of recommending either assistive technology or cognitive support technologies for the people with disabilities that you work with. This is the model that is I think most useful and most functional in medical settings. In rehabilitation settings, the MPT, Matching Persons with Technology model from Marcia Shearer, also addresses the characteristics, needs, and preferences of individual users, the characteristics of the milieu or the environment, both physical characteristics and attitudes, and also characteristics of the devices. So the MPT model really is a good one for matching, as it says, matching people with technology that they are most likely to use in their real-world settings. There is a child in school version of the MPT. My experience is that it's used more with vocational rehabilitation clients and adult services. So for those of you who work in schools, and I'm assuming many of you work in schools, the SET framework is probably very familiar to you. And again, the focus is on function. So what are the tools that a student in a particular environment needs in order to complete a task? And there's a reference down here at the bottom, joysofbala.com, where you can find more information about the SET framework if you're not familiar with it. But let's go on and talk about cognitive support and technology. What is cognitive support technology? Here's a definition from Wohlgather and Mayhorn. And they say cognitive support technology is technology for cognitive support. That refers to the assistive aspects of technology that enhance mental capabilities and avoid the limitations of users. So it's not so much different than most of the things that we've thought about as assistive technology in the past, but the focus is a little bit different. We've often in the past talked about, for instance, technology for augmentative communication, and we thought, okay, well, a person can't speak or can't speak well enough to be understood, and so we want to give them a way to do that. Cognitive supports actually came sort of late to the field of assistive technology when we began to realize that even when people had memory difficulties or difficulties understanding a complicated task, we could also provide technology for them that would help with those tasks. So we're newer at this kind of assistive technology than we are at other kinds of technology. Again, many of you work in medical settings or are asking for assistive technology for the people you work with through some kind of insurance or Medicaid funding, Medicaid, Medicare funding. It's important to know that when we talk about cognitive support technology in a medical setting, the definition is a little bit different, and we define it as cognitive support technology as a cognitive prosthesis. So cognitive prosthetics are assistive technologies that help a person with cognitive deficits function more independently and is specific to the person's needs. It's important, as you probably already know, to use the vocabulary of the environment that you're working in if you are applying for funding. So I wanted to make sure that if you are applying for funding for cognitive prosthetics in a medical setting, you use the right terminology. One of the things that I think is really fascinating about cognitive support technology is that this is a field that is research-based. Many of us who started early on in assistive technology started working with people when there was some obvious need. The first time I worked with kids with in assistive technology, I was working with children who had pretty severe physical handicaps, and we were looking for ways for them to do things that were really difficult or impossible for them, like writing, like speaking, like doing some of the academic tasks that they needed to do in my classroom. And what we did with those kids was to just try things and hope that we could figure out a system that worked for them, and we were pretty good at that. We came up with all kinds of options from very low-tech things. I can't tell you how much duct tape I used when I had that classroom. But we also began to discover very high-tech things like alternative keyboards and augmentative communication devices that worked for kids. And as we experimented with those students and those devices, companies came along with us, and the field of assistive technology really grew. But it grew from a trial and error basis. And that's fine. It's created a whole range of tools for people with disabilities that open up the world for them. The thing that's different about cognitive support technology is because it came along a little bit later, and because as we began to think about cognitive supports, we started to think about people with pretty severe intellectual disabilities, developmental delays that were pretty significant, and there was a sense in the world initially that cognitive supports wouldn't work for those people because of their developmental delays or because of their autism or their traumatic brain injury. So a great deal of the initial cognitive support technology work was research studies, and this is just a list of a few of those, but research studies that wanted to investigate whether or not technology could help people with significant cognitive disabilities to do tasks and do things differently. So there were studies about things like money management. Could technology help people who couldn't make change to manage their money better? Could technology help them use an ATM, use the internet more independently? Each one of these tasks that you see on this list was a research study, an individual research study. And what we learned from those studies is that cognitive support technology that's designed for people with cognitive disabilities can help with all of these tasks. So let's see some of the results of the research. Some of the things we know is that people who use cognitive support technology because of either a developmental delay or a traumatic brain injury or autism are able to do tasks with fewer external prompts, make fewer errors, complete more tasks successfully, and complete more complex tasks. I see that somebody's asking about the research list and the studies, and I don't believe that I put this list up on the handouts, but if you are interested in the studies and the specific citations of these, I am certainly able to send you that list. I have it right here on this computer, but I can't get to it right now. So send me an email, and I think my email is, on the first slide of my part of the presentation, so I'd be happy to share that with you. What we know about cognitive support technology from that research, besides that, is that cognitive support technology can decrease the need for prompts and the number of errors people make, decrease the need for support, decrease the cost of care, and also decrease caregiver fatigue just because they, while caregivers in group homes or vocational settings may still need to be present all the time, they can depend on the person with a disability to do more for themselves. The research also shows that cognitive support technology can increase the things on the right-hand side of the list: independence, self-management, self-instruction, and self-monitoring, and therefore autonomy and social acceptance. So that's some of the things that we know about cognitive support technology, but I want to go back to that question of what is cognitive support technology? In general, and again, there's a huge range of technologies, but in general, the principles behind cognitive support technology are that we need to have a task focus. You can't say, is there technology that helps kids with autism? We have to say, what technology would help this person remember to turn off the stove before they leave their house? So as we begin to look at different kinds of cognitive supports and the reasons for cognitive supports, we're going to have a real task focus. Another principle behind cognitive support technology is that because there is such a focus on function in daily environments and the use of technology to support that function, what we want to do, to try to do as a principle, is have the technology be only as special as necessary. The principle of only as special as necessary comes originally from work that was done in Vermont by Michael Giangreco and a task force from the Vermont Department of Education. And I really like the idea that I think it's a principle that's used both in making inclusion decisions, independent living decisions, things like that, but that whatever we provide should be as special as it needs to be in order to support the person doing the task, but only as special as necessary. So that's one of the basic underlying principles of cognitive support technology. Another way of saying that is probably the simplest tool to overcome the barrier. And a final underlying principle of cognitive support technology is that we cannot, especially with people with memory and planning and organization difficulties, we cannot just hand them technology and expect that they will be able to understand and know how to use it. So planning for the use of supports, or the supports that will be needed to either help a person learn how to use the technology and to do the task, because we're giving people technology because they aren't able to do a particular task, and then how to help maintain that technology use over time is another issue that comes up in the underlying principles. So I promised you that about half our time would be spent today talking about background information about cognitive supports, and that the other half of our time today would be spent talking about a range of technologies. So this is the second half of our time together today. We're going to talk about a range of technologies, and cognitive support technology can be anything from, this is a Little Mac switch from AbleNet, to electrode brain research. There's some really interesting kinds of brain research that we won't be talking about today because I am not a brain researcher, but ways that people can use implants and electrodes to be more functional in their environment and more independent. So it's a big range, was the point that I wanted to make on this slide. Our next, so let's look at cognitive support technology for memory, for scheduling, and for time management. Again, I want to point out that the range is from very young children to very elderly people that this kind of technology can be useful for. And again, I think one of the principles of cognitive support is that it has to be something that the person sees as valuable and that the environment supports. So let's talk about memory supports. Here's a definition of what memory is, which is, I thought I knew what memory was and didn't need a definition until I started looking at this area of cognitive supports, because the folks that we support and work with have quite a range of memory disabilities. Some of them have trouble acquiring and storing new information. Some of them have trouble retrieving information that they already have stored in their brains but just can't get out. And there's a whole variety of kinds of memory disabilities based on these four aspects. I remember early on in my work with cognitive support technology, I was working with a student who I had tried to teach basic math facts to for about a year and a half, when we finally discovered that the issue for him was not that he didn't know the math facts, but that he couldn't retrieve them and speak the right answer for a particular math problem. So I'd show him 2 plus 2, and he was just as likely to say 7 as he was to say 4. And the way we discovered that was that we gave him a computer program, because I was tired of drilling him on flashcards. And as soon as we gave him a computer program, he got all the answers right every time. And it turned out that the issue was not so much a matter of knowing math facts as it was a matter of being able to retrieve the words from his brain in order to say the right answer. So different kinds of memory need different kinds of cognitive supports. Let's look at some examples of cognitive supports, and I want to, again, emphasize the fact that it could be anything from very low-tech things like picture charts, a phone, the ability to phone directory assistance and ask for help, a special pillbox that's got the days of the week on it, which we see all the time, or different kinds of paper planners to remember to do things. Moderate tech, mid-tech kinds of supports for memory might include alarms, vibrating reminders, timers. This should say on-off timers instead of on-of timers. I apologize. And high-tech things like alarms, and there's a device I'm going to show you in a little bit called the jitterbug. I want to invite you to type in the chat box other kinds of tools that you're currently using to help someone with memory issues. What kinds of things do you use when you help kids or adults to remember tasks that they need to do? A smart pen. Linda says smart pen. I'm going to invite the rest of you to chime in with other kinds of ideas. But Linda, I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit more about how the smart pen helps the people that you work with remember things. Can you type in the chat box? I'm assuming that you can all see the chat box. So we're seeing some really good items: task list, visual daily schedule. Oh my gosh, I can't even keep up with it. Thank you all for submitting things. I'm just going to mention a couple things that I see that are sort of unique. Kathy says Google Calendar. Somebody said maps, picture maps, as a reminder of how to get from one place to another. Other people are saying they can't see the responses in the chat box. So, Gloria, I'm going to ask you to type in a message. It's for those folks who can only see their own messages. What can you tell us to do? Because this is not a system I am used to. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you what other people have said. Several people mentioned sticky notes posted in key places. Carol Rose mentions video and pictures on the iPad. Here's Linda talking about the Smart Pen. It's a great way to record lectures, and it provides interactive notes as well. So I'm assuming, Linda, that in terms of memory, that you might be using the Smart Pen to make a list of things to do when writing that list might be difficult, and using it on the special paper. A lot of people mentioning Evernote, alarms with a calendar app on the iPad, several iPad examples, and we all know how popular those tablet computers are these days. So we've got everything from lists to Google Docs and Google Schedule. Gloria, I'm hoping you can tell us how we can all see everybody's responses. If not, I will change the way I do things in the future. I wasn't aware of that problem. But I'm seeing lots of people say that they can't. Oh, Gloria says I have to cut and paste as you have to respond to all. So we'll get that one figured out for next time. But let's go on to the next slide. Hopefully those messages are coming up as Gloria does cut and paste. And I forgot, here's the poll that I was going to have you type into. So I apologize. That one's my fault. This is my first time using the ReadyTalk system, and I'll know better next time. Let's go on to some examples that I wanted to show you, maybe things that you weren't aware of. So here's one. VideoBrix is a product from AbleNet, but there are several other versions of this small video recorder. I think this device is about 2 inches by 2 inches, and it's designed to make one reasonably short video with sound to help people either communicate a message or, in my case, use it as a memory device. When I've shown this device in workshops, we often gave everybody the opportunity to play with one for a while and then come up with ideas about how they would use it. People often come up with ideas like for morning routines or getting ready to go to work or getting ready to go to school, where you want to show somebody the specific step that they should be on. Another cool idea about using the VideoBrix communicator or some small video communicator is several people who worked in a vocational program suggested that you could record the place where a person's supposed to get off the bus in order to walk to work and show a small video of what it would look like as the bus got to that place as a reminder of what that should look like. That the person could take the VideoBrix on the bus and be reminded of what it will look like when they need to get off the bus. So for people who have trouble storing memory, particularly visual memory, this might be a wonderful tool. Many of you have mentioned reminders of different sorts. There are many medication reminders on the market, everything from watches with alarms to devices like the Motorola medication reminder and the e-pill reminder, where there's a bit more information given. The e-pill reminder tells you that it's time to take a certain pill, and describes the pill and also how many you're supposed to take. The e-pill device is one that allows people to, that dispenses the pills as it's time to take them. So you actually load them in the order that they're supposed to come out, and then the reminder pops open at a certain time. Another device that I understand is very useful, and I understand this again from Lynn Getlow, as a memory support is the PowerLink. Many of us who work in schools are familiar with AbleNet's PowerLink as a device to turn things off and on, but the newer PowerLink has the ability to set timers for how long things stay on. So my friend Lynn talked about a woman that she works with who has OCD. She has a mental health condition where she's obsessive and compulsive, and she is afraid that she's left the stove on or left the coffee pot on. What she does with the PowerLink is to plug it in and set it on the automatic timer for however long she needs to have the coffee pot on or some device on, and then she can be confident that it will go off automatically after that length of time. So she's able to leave her home more easily because she's sure that she doesn't have to remember to turn things off if they're plugged into the PowerLink. Another similar device, Kathy Howery says, "Oh man, great use of the PowerLink. I need this." It's just a totally different use. And when Lynn first said to me the PowerLink was a great memory device, I couldn't even figure out what she was talking about. So glad to pass that idea on. For bigger appliances and particularly cooking, and many of you maybe have elderly people in your life who are beginning to have trouble remembering to turn the stove off. Here's an automatic stove guard that turns things off and on again so that you don't have to remember to do it. When the stove guard, it's a motion detector, but when it doesn't see motion for a particular span of time that you can set, it just turns everything off. Same with water. This is a very simple device, the automatic faucet controls, and you can, I wanted to say to you, this link on the PowerPoint slide here was good when I put it in the slide, but the link doesn't work anymore, but you can Google automatic faucet controls and see what it is. What this is just an on and off thing. It's good for memory because it helps you remember, or you don't have to remember to turn the water off. But it's also good for people with mobility impairments. So you just have to hit the stick that comes down from the faucet, and that turns the water on, and then when it's perfectly horizontal, it turns it off. Also, this location reminder is a really good tool for when you forget where you put your whatever it is. And I want to show you that it's about the size of a quarter. It's thicker than a quarter, so it's a little bit big, but really good for things like the remote control for the TV. Apps. Two apps that are really useful for memory. Forgetful is it's an iPad app, but what's different about it from some of the calendar apps that we have is that you can record both text and video. So when the reminder comes up, you hear a chime and you touch the reminder icon and the video plays automatically. I think for some of our kids who have difficulty with transitions, this is also a really good app. A similar one, but one that's text only and can be sent to phones as well, is TextMinder. the TextMinder app just sends a text message when it's time to do something. Again, something that you can do for a person with a memory difficulty or that they can do for themselves. Our next topic in the webinar today is scheduling, and I wanted to use this slide and this example to talk about one of the other principles of cognitive support. The picture on the left is one of some kind of a day planner calendar, and I think it's actually from Day Planner. It was just one I pulled off the web. But you can see on the left that while this planner has many, many features, it also is fairly complicated. One of the principles of cognitive support for many kinds of disabilities is that things that have many features and many abilities are sometimes have so many features and so many abilities that they are confusing to people with cognitive disabilities. So I show you the picture on the right, which is a day planner from the Attainment Company. It's a wipe-off, short, small book. It's probably about the size of half a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper. But it's designed, what you see in the picture is one full day with different kinds of times on it. So a calendar that can easily be carried around. It looks acceptable for most people, and is a simplified version of some of the calendar apps that we see in other settings, because too many features can sometimes be confusing for people. Scheduling, again, the NeverMiss Timer is a good one because you can set multiple alarms. And if you get a chance, Google Clocky on the web or go to this website. Clocky is this funny alarm clock. It has a very loud alarm, and once it goes off, it rolls off the table and rolls around the room. You can see the big wheels on both sides of it. And it's designed for people who have trouble getting up in the morning. So in order to make it turn off, you actually have to get up and sort of chase it. That was developed by a college student who was having trouble getting to his morning classes. So two different kinds of alarms that have multiple functions. For this, somebody's asking about the end of the presentation. We're going to end at 12:30. This is a resource that I believe you have on the website that you'll be able to go to get handouts for the webinar, and it's got a list of things that you can do with cell phone to help with memory and particularly scheduling difficulties. Schedule Assistant is a product that was developed by the AbleLink company. AbleLink, not AbleNet. It sometimes gets me confused. AbleLink does really high-tech software that's available for iPhones and Android phones, and also for many of the tablet devices. This is a device that allows you to schedule individual items for a particular person and to create customized videos and reminders that have sound and pictures or can have video. So if you're looking for high-tech solutions for possibly adults or people who are learning to become more independent, I recommend this one. Final category, right before we end, is time management. We looked at this easy planner, day planner calendar as one option for time management, but I wanted to talk to you about a couple of apps that you might think about as you're looking for cognitive support. Airport Mania is a little bit different than some of the other things we've talked about because it actually teaches time management, and it teaches it in the realm of being a airport flight controller. If you don't schedule your planes right, they crash. So it's a sort of a fun way to learn it. Many of you are familiar with the time timer software and the actual physical clocks for time timer. There's also an app, a time timer app, and it's a countdown timer. So as your time gets closer to ending, the red space gets smaller and smaller. As we think about memory, we want to use these guiding questions. What is the functional routine that the person needs to do? Is it difficult or impossible? And what are the aspects of that difficulty? Are there special things that we need to think about with the person as we provide cognitive support? And what can they currently do? Because always we want to build on that. So as we end today, I want to encourage you with someone in mind to think about what supports are in place for that person now. How can you build on the existing supports? Which of those supports are dependent on other people? So which of those supports require people to be there in order for the person to do the task? And then how can we use what low-tech supports are already available, and how could we use cognitive support to help with those difficult tasks so that people become independent? Because that's really the reason that we use technology in any ways, to help people with disabilities to become more independent, more self-sufficient, make fewer errors, complete more tasks successfully, and complete more complicated tasks. I want to thank you all. I'd be happy to take any questions or comments either on the chat right now, or you can tell us how we're doing, because we will send you a short survey. It'll appear on your screen right after the meeting, and I'd love to hear feedback from you. As I said, I'm doing 2 more of these presentations, so any feedback you can give me on how to make the next 2 more successful would be very helpful. And thank you for those who are sending me kind words. Here's AbleNetUniversity. This is who we are working through and working for. I'm seeing lots of thank yous, and I really appreciate the kind words. If you can do that survey, and if you have any specifics for me, I'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, I will say thank you back. And if you have any things that you want to say to the AbleNet company, here's their phone number. So it was a pleasure talking with you all today, and I look forward to the next time. Join us again on April 2nd, and we'll be talking about organization and planning tools.